Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Off the Dome Sports Podcast, your favorite sports podcast where two and sometimes three sports lovers sit and give their hot takes.
Off the Dome.
I am Redfish.
I'm Rebo Hustle.
And I'm
Mustang.
I like the character out of Mustang today.
He's feeling some type of way.
He always is.
Been through hell and back today.
Also true.
Happens to the best of us. Of course, we are going to be steering this ship today. If you enjoy the content here, make sure to follow us on the X, artist formerly known as Twitter, _Dome Pod. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. We have these full-length episodes as well as cut it into clips, posted it on there for your viewing enjoyment. So make sure to leave comments about what you like and don't like. Maybe, if you're watching our Saints part, tell us what you think about these Saints rookies. We're going to be talking about some LSU and some Pels as well. Tell us what you think about LSU baseball, even the football season coming up, and then what are the Pelicans going to do in the offseason. So lots of fun content coming your way. Make sure to check out the No Network as well. You can see it in the bottom left-hand corner there. The No, K-N-E-A-U-X, the only way to spell it. Be in the know. Great content coming on over there as well. We will keep you updated throughout this offseason of the Saints and LSU football and the Pels. I mean, it's kind of those dog days of summer right now, and we'll try to keep on putting out some content to keep you on your toes and in the loop of everything Louisiana sports. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our first topic here. Saints rookie minicamp. The draft was just a couple weeks ago, and I've got to say it's probably the most excited I've been about a Saints draft class since 2017. I feel like we really picked for need and picked good players at those needs, which I think is a huge improvement over stuff we've seen in the past with, trading up for Marcus Davenport or picking Peyton Turner at 29. It always felt like we were just taking these project guys who, they had all the potential in the world, but where do they really fit into the team? This year, I think we see clear spaces for these players to fit, and I'm really excited for what these rookies can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a great mini camp from what we can tell so far. Everybody keeps saying that there's this aura around Spencer Rattler of him really taking control of the offense, really dedicating time into learning the playbook. And in interviews, he said that the playbook isn't much different from his playbook at South Carolina, and so he's learning quickly. One thing I saw is a lot of people were saying, well, how good is he if everything's on air? But they've run a lot of 7-on-7 and a lot of team drills in this rookie minicamp. And day 2 of the minicamp, he went 11 for 12 against a live defense. And so that's one thing to say, that at least he's accurate. At least he's knowing where the receiver is going to be. Yes, we only spent a 5th-round pick on him, and Haener was a 4th. I think that on the depth chart already, he's kind of inching closer and closer to that QB2.
Yeah, I think Rattler, I don't think a lot of people were expecting him to be sitting there when we took him, but he was, so we went ahead and took a shot on him. I think something that's really going to help his development is implementing that Clint Kubiak offense. Clint Kubiak, of course, coming from the tree of Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, those type of guys, where it's a more standardized, modern West Coast offense, as opposed to something like Sean Payton and Pete Carmichael run that, you saw guys like Chase Daniel on social media the other day breaking down the playbook he had when he played for the Saints. And, it's thicker than a Bible. It's just this huge playbook that nobody can replicate. Whereas with Clint Kubiak, it's much more of a modern West Coast type offense that colleges are running too. So I think it's easier for quarterbacks to develop and easier for quarterbacks to understand, which I think you'll see Spencer be able to do in this offseason.
Yeah, like you said, we've had some pretty
remarkable.
Yeah, trying to look for a word for it, but remarkable fits. Draft classes since 2017. Here and there, we found some guys that we got excited for, like Brian Brissy. Personally, Alontae Taylor I was excited for. But as, draft classes as a whole, we haven't seen one like this in a long time. And just to go off Spencer Rattler again, since we didn't invest much into him, it's one of those picks where, you can still have high hopes. And even if he doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world because we didn't waste a first-round pick on somebody who ended up not working out.
Right.
We got him for cheap. Why not? Why not let him show us his potential, show us what he can do, and maybe break that roster?
Yeah, and after Derek Carr last season, I think a lot of Saints fans are looking for somebody to look towards the future to, because it's not Derek Carr. Not saying he's the worst quarterback in the league by any means, and I know he's a lot better than people give him credit for. But Spencer Rattler had a lot of experience in college, and he has a lot of different tools that you can see on the field, and it'll be really interesting to see if not only if he cracks the roster, but if he can make a push to get some PT during the season.
Yeah, and with Derek Carr, a lot of things coming out of camp are that, yes, he may not be able to touch a football right now. He may not be able to touch the practice field, but he is spending a lot of extra time in the locker room and in the facility, just learning the playbook, reviewing film with Coach Kubiak, just to know what's going on. And that's a great thing to see. As long as his mind is still in the game, I'm happy with Derek Carr being our starting quarterback. But to touch on a guy that has to pay off for the Saints, Talise Fuaga. He's taking snaps on both sides. There's not much to talk about an offensive lineman until they put the pads on, but from what I can tell, he's good enough to play right now, and so they're moving him to left as we speak just to give him the experience.
Yeah, that's exactly what Dennis Allen said. He said that they feel comfortable with him at right. They don't really have any question marks there, but they want to try him out at left and see what happens. Just because Ryan Ramczyk is such a big question mark as far as his health goes right now. He could play 0 snaps all year, or he could start the whole season, or somewhere in between. We really don't know what's going on with Ryan Ramczyk. So to have a guy like Fuaga, who we pick at 14, that may have that versatility to switch left-right, is pretty big for us. Adding on to the offensive line, we got to have some weapons moving downfield, and Bub Means is a guy who not only has a great name and not only has some great potential, but a guy that people are looking forward to cracking this roster and maybe getting some chance to play on the field. It's not like he's got a huge loaded depth chart above him. Of course, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, the 1-2, but everything after that's pretty open on this roster. So if Bub Means can make some plays here in rookie minicamp and then move into training camp and really make himself known, I think there could be some big days for him ahead.
Yeah, one thing about Bub Means that we touched on the draft review was his mindset. And he's continuing to have that mindset of, I got to do with the dirty work, or I have to be super physical, I have to use my frame. And he's doing that over the middle. He had a huge post to end practice. I believe it was also day 2, and Spencer Rattler threw up a contested ball because that's the only option he had. And Bub Means went up and got it and fought off some defenders for it, even without pads on.
Yeah. I feel like with Bub Means, he kind of landed in the perfect spot because, you look back at Saints receivers over the years, and I feel like we've kind of been known to find that diamond in the rough receiver, kind of that, didn't have the spectacular attitude as some of these, early first-round guys, but still are a key piece to any offense in the NFL.
Yeah, a lot of times the Saints receiver, if he's making headlines, he wasn't a first-round pick. Michael Thomas wasn't a first-round pick. You look back, Marcus Colston, not a first-round pick. Lance Moore, Robert Meacham. Chris Olave was a high-end draft pick, but most of the guys you see in Saints uniforms, they don't have high draft capital when it comes to the receiver position. Bub Means may be able to fit into that same category as far as making a splash without having that draft capital to back him up. Last thing about the rookies, Kool-Aid McKinstry, our second-round pick, a guy who nobody expected to be there, so we moved up a couple and got him. Biggest news about him is he bought his mother a G-Wagon today, so he's spending his money well, not on himself but on his family, so we know he values that, and that's whether that translates to the football field or not, yet to be seen. However, makes a Saints fan feel good to know that our newest addition to the defensive back room is taking care of his family.
Yeah, and with these mini camp practices not being available to the public, it's kind of hard to get a feel for how well the defensive players have been doing. So guys like Jalen Ford, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who knows what they're doing on the field because it's just not a highlight material. But you can definitely tell that all the players drafted by the Saints this year have adopted the culture and are ready to work, and they show that in every locker room interview or on the side of the field, whatever it may be.
Culture's big time here in New Orleans, so hopefully those guys fit right in and can make an impact in their rookie season. Moving on from the Saints, the LSU Baseball Tigers. Rebo Hustle.
Yeah, it really stung losing to Alabama on Friday on a wild throw from Alex Milazzo on a dribbler. You had that game pretty much locked up, and they were able to walk you off in the ninth because of that. And, I mean, we know this season's been real tough to be an LSU baseball fan. They're ranked 34th in the RPI. There's 32 teams make it. But also there's, like, guaranteed spots of conference champions and things like that. So maybe even if you're number 32, you don't make it just off of conference winners.
Yeah.
This weekend we play Ole Miss, who's rated 24th in the RPI. So if you're able to sneak 2 games or even sneak a sweep, it'd really help your hopes making a regional.
Yeah, I mean, even these games are not only crucial for that, but just to, confirm your spot in the SEC tournament. Because like we talked about before, the 2 teams don't make it, and right now LSU could possibly not make it if Missouri manages to
beat up on
crack a
Mississippi
few
State.
wins against Mississippi State. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the SEC standings, you can see them there in the bottom right. LSU 6th in the West after winning the national championship last season. Definitely not a good look for the Tigers. However, you never know what can happen in the SEC championship. I was talking about this with a guy I know who's actually a big Razorbacks fan, and he was saying, he kind of expects Arkansas to take the same route that LSU did last year, where it's use the first 2 games to really figure out your pitching rotation, who's going to lead you through the regional and super regional, and then kind of just lose out from there because you're not really worried about winning an SEC championship when you know you're going to have a number 1 seed. So you could see teams like Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, A&M. Like, those are teams that are going to host a regional. So you could see them slacking off and not really worrying about winning this SEC championship. And I think that's where LSU needs to figure it out and be like, hey, if we want to make the postseason guaranteed, let's go for an SEC championship run.
Yeah.
Because you saw last year with A&M. A&M wasn't a very good baseball team last year going into the SEC championship. However, they come in, they beat LSU, they catch fire, and then they end up making it into the postseason. So LSU could definitely do something similar. And I think, for me, I think that's the biggest way for us to make a run into the regionals is take at least 2 from Ole Miss. I mean, obviously, everybody wants a sweep. You want to win every single game, but if you take 2 from Ole Miss and then make it to the SEC championship, it's going to be hard for RPI to just whatever formula they use. It's going to be hard to keep LSU out when they're last year's national champions, and then they end the season on a hot run like that.
But like Redfish just stated, you kind of have to focus on what's next, right? Don't look too far in the future. Don't be like, okay, don't be worried about the SEC tournament right now. Right now, you're worried about Ole Miss. You got to get some wins against Ole Miss to get to the SEC tournament. You got to get some wins in the SEC tournament to have a shot at postseason. So their main focus right now should just be the very next game.
Yeah, and this Ole Miss team is very good. The record doesn't say that, but just like we did 2 weekends ago, they took 2 games off of Texas A&M, and they have the pitching staff to go deeper than LSU does. And so it's going to boil down to Sunday. I'm sure we'll go 1-1 Friday, Saturday. Hopefully you win both, but realistically, you win one of Friday and Saturday, and their Sunday starter is very good. If you can do what Texas A&M did and get him off the mound as soon as possible, then you can drive a knife through Ole Miss's heart.
That's violent.
do it.
Sundays are definitely our worst days, though. I mean, I think we've gotten like 1 or 2 wins all year on Sundays. It seems like we can never find a win on those days because of the pitching staff. I mean, Gage Jump and Luke Holman have been consistent all year and have been really good players for us. And we always seem to stay close on Fridays and Saturdays, whether we win or lose. It's never a blowout either way. But Sundays is where we always lose those battles. So if we can find a Sunday guy who can come out and not allow 5 or 6 runs in the first few innings, hopefully we can hold that against Ole Miss and our bats can get moving. Just because we've been so inconsistent all year. I mean, we've seen games where we score 13, 14 runs, and then we've seen games against Alabama where we couldn't score more than 3. So it's really important for us to find our footing, gain some consistency. Even if we're not the best team, I'd rather us be more consistent than having these highs and lows.
Yeah, and a big part of that is just having your offense and your defense on the same page. You can't put it more simply than that, but also it's a very complex thing to do. Like, yeah, you don't want to allow runs, but you want to score runs. That's how you win the game of baseball. But it's more to it than that. You got to have your pitchers in the same mindset as your bats. We've seen countless times this year where, like you said, we can score as many runs as we want, but that doesn't help you if you're allowing more.
Right. Yeah,
so you have to stay focused. You got to stay on the same page with your team. It's a big part of this game, especially when it comes to postseason.
Yep. If you want to make a run, you have to have the arms to do it, but you also have to be able to, score in 2-out situations, move runners on base, everything that comes on the offensive side of the plate as well. Before we move on from LSU, we don't necessarily have a slide for it, but we can talk about Paul Skeens. Finally made his MLB debut. Somebody who, of course, we absolutely love in this household. Somebody who really pushed us to a national championship last season and has every tool it takes to be the next generational superstar at the MLB level. First game, Pittsburgh Pirates versus Mustangs. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mustangs, Chicago Cubs. It wasn't a perfect game by any means. We're not saying Paul Skeens had the greatest debut of all time, but, 7 strikeouts, 17 pitches over 100 miles an hour. It's not like he allowed, 13 hits or anything.
No.
I want to say it was around 3 walks, 6 hits, 3 runs. So it's not great, but, when you counterbalance that with 7 strikeouts and you pitch 4 innings and you're playing against the Cubs who have some bats in their lineup, you can't really complain too much.
Yeah, definitely. If you're Paul Skeens or any Pittsburgh Pirates fan, you can't look down on this. Not only did he have a very good debut for a rookie, for anybody coming into the MLB, it's a tough league, but especially when you add on the fact that the Cubs are hot this year, especially when it comes to their bats. And at that point in time, they had just gotten back Cody Bellinger, Dansby Swanson, Ian Happ. I believe Suzuki was still out at that time.
Yeah, I think he was.
But yeah, like I said, these Chicago's bats have been hot, especially before all these players went on the IL, and they picked right back up when they got back together. And I'm always going to cheer for the Cubs, but if they're going to lose to somebody, I'm glad it could be Paul Skeens.
True, very true. And
I really wish that they would have debuted him against the Brewers or the Cardinals or someone else in the division, but it's what it is.
Glad it wasn't the Red Sox because he wouldn't have allowed any hits against them. They
Complete
are
game
terrible.
Shutout.
Yep,
MLB
absolutely.
debut.
We suck. Anyway, Rebo doesn't have a team anymore, so he has no dog in the fight.
Yeah.
He has abandoned his Padres, and he is now an MLB free agent. So if you're a fan of any MLB team out there who is not the Cubs, Red Sox, or Nationals, recruit Rebo Hustle.
Yeah, he's
to your fandom.
a lost dog looking for a home.
We've also
Just
banned
make sure
him.
you don't bring him into my division.
Correct. We've also banned him from the NL Central. We have banned him from the Yankees, and the Dodgers and the Astros. So, he's got limited options, but that's still 20 teams he can pick from.
Yeah.
Anyway, continuing on from baseball into basketball, the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, this is the one where I feel like we're most confident we can talk about right now because LSU Baseball just has us down in the dumps, and feels like there's nothing positive to say there. Saints are in literally the dog days of summer. Nothing really moving on that front after the draft. But the Pelicans, we've got stuff to talk about with the Pelicans.
Yeah, the lottery just happened. Pels weren't in it, but at least the draft is set. And we've got a couple prospects that we wanted to touch on that could fall in our range of, I believe, 17 to 21.
We have both the 17th and 21st pick.
And so first you need to address what are you doing with Jonas Valanciunas? Are you signing him back? Is he willing to take some cheap money just to continue with this roster? Does David Griffin even want him back just to change the locker room a little bit? And so we looked at centers, just guys like Kyle Filipowski, who could go in the top 5 for all we know, but he is a guy that I would be willing to trade up for, a stretch big who can pretty much do it all. A guy that kind of falls closer to our range in Khalil Ware. He was kind of forced out of Oregon last year, really struggled, but he is also a stretch big. I think he's 7'2" or 7'3", real lanky, can defend the rim, had a great sophomore year at Indiana. Would you like to take Reed Sheppard?
I would. Reed Sheppard, point guard out of Kentucky. I think they had him listed technically as a shooting guard because Rob Dillingham was
smaller.
Yeah, was like 10 pounds lighter and an inch shorter or something. But I think Reed Sheppard is a much better facilitator. He's a much better initiator of the offense from the point guard position. So I see him more as a 1 in the league rather than a 2. I really liked what I saw out of him in the postseason. He was really grabbing some eyes in March Madness. So I think if he's sitting there for you at 17, I mean, that's another guy kind of like Filipowski who you could see going in the top 10 just because he has a lot of consistent traits with what works in the NBA as far as a offensive initiator goes. But I like him at 17 if he's there. We also can look at Zach Edey, center out of Purdue. I know Mustang's a big fan of Zach Edey. Mustang, you want to talk about Zach Edey a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've watched all of these guys play just from, March Madness and the college basketball, but really the only one that I know I can remember watching play was Zach Edey, just because of all the hype around him. His name brought in hype alone. So, of course, I did notice him on the court, real high motor, and I'm not just saying that because of the meme or whatever. He's going to run up and down the court. It might not look pretty, but he will run up and down the court.
Based on what we saw at the Combine, it will not look pretty, guaranteed. However, he will play. He will play his heart out. And did he win College Player of the Year?
2 years in a row.
2 years in a row. And then they finally got Purdue to a place where they had a chance at a championship rather than losing in the first round. So a guy who's won in the college level, not only personal awards, but also as a team. So Zach Edey, a guy who's probably going to go later in the first round. But if he's there at 21 and you don't have Jonas Valanciunas, why not take a shot on a 7'4" guy who knows how to score buckets? And then a guy that Rebo Hustle and I were looking into before this and really just kind of picked up on immediately, guy who we think would fit the Pelicans really, really well based on what we think this team needs, and that's kind of like I talked about with Reed Sheppard, a guy who can initiate the offense, a guy who can facilitate, and that's Tyler Kolek. Point guard out of Marquette. He averaged nearly 8 assists per game, and in college, that's a lot. In college, you're not getting the assist numbers that you see in the NBA with guys who we'll talk about in a minute, like Trae Young or Darius Garland, guys like that. Tyler Kolek really made a mark in the college basketball landscape. I think, I saw some articles that went as far as to say that behind Zach Edey, he was really the best player in college basketball and led a number 2 seed Marquette far into March Madness. So I think he's a really good player. He's going to be available at that 17 to 21 range where we could really get him with either pick. And I think he kind of fits exactly what this Pelicans team needs. He's a bigger point guard who can pass the ball around and also score from all 3 levels. And if that's not exactly what the Pelicans need, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, some form of facilitator.
Yeah, somebody who can pass the ball around. I mean, I know we, say, point Zion, which is great for some of the game. But when you have CJ, Brandon Ingram, and Zion, who are all three ball-heavy players who need the ball in their hands to make an impact, if you can get a guy who can just run sets, move off the ball, and also pass the ball around and make sure guys get to their spots, I think that's really important for what we're seeing in New Orleans.
Yeah, and so other things this offseason is what's going to change, because David Griffin has made it clear that things will change. And the hottest commodity to trade is Brandon Ingram. He's on the last year of his deal. He's still really young, has a potential to be an all-star, has been in the past. And so you might as well trade him while he's hot. You're going to have to pay him a massive amount of money in the future if you don't. And so we did a couple of trade engine trades with the Hawks, the Cavs, and the Mavs, and it's what's been talked about the most. With the Hawks, you're looking at guys like Trae Young and Double O. I'm not going to try his name.
Onyeka Okongwu.
That's it.
That wasn't that hard.
Yeah, I just forgot it for a second.
Valid.
Somebody had to point it out, but I did just forget it for a second.
I do remember a while back you said someone's name.
And it was beautiful.
I still don't know who they are.
Trae Young, though, that's a big name getting floated around in trade talks right now, and as is Brandon Ingram. And these three teams are three that are not only have players that would make sense to come back to New Orleans, but teams that have been talked about in the media as favorites to land Brandon Ingram. For me, I think the Hawks offer us the most in return. That's why I put them first. With Trae Young, he's the best player you're going to get from any of the teams out there who are looking to trade. And obviously, we know his defense isn't necessarily what you want. So we would have to build around that and figure out, how do we work that into our system? Obviously, we have guys like Herb Jones and Dyson Daniels who can be absolute lockdown defenders. And depending on what we do at the center position, do we have somebody who can, push that point guard into the paint and protect the rim? But I think if you're trading Brandon Ingram, you want to get a guy who is comparable in terms of talent to him. And I would think Trae Young's probably the best player out there who you could get.
Yeah, it's the only situation, at least with these three teams, that you're going former All-Star for former All-Star. And with these teams that we have, you want to address the 1 and the 5, where the Hawks can give you both, the Cavs can give you a 5, and the Magic can give you a 1. So the Cavs situation, we know that the Pelicans are in love with Jared Allen. I am too. Great screen and roller. Would be awesome with Tyler Kolek, in my opinion. But what does the package look like? Do you have to give up young guys like Dyson Daniels or Larry Nance? Larry Nance, not a young guy, but still a great backup.
Excellent.
Young Larry Nance Jr.
And then with the Magic, it's a trade for younger pieces. Do you plan on going into some form of rebuild, and also what's very confusing is, what does Brandon Ingram bring to the Magic? I don't understand why the Magic's been floated around. You've got wings for days, and that's kind of all they have, except for these young point guards that are being floated in this trade conversation.
Yeah, the trades that we've seen from the Magic are guys like Wendell Carter and Cole Anthony, possibly a Jalen Suggs, which obviously those guys would help the Pelicans. I mean, Cole Anthony kind of fits that facilitator role. He's not a fantastic scorer, and he's not some worldly defender, but he will pass the ball. He will get the offense moving, and he's really good at being a NBA. Like, he's just a good NBA player. Wendell Carter, athletic, smaller for the center position, but he's very athletic. It would be an interesting fit next to Zion, in my opinion. Not necessarily this. It would definitely wouldn't be the same fit as Zion and JV. Wendell Carter, very different player there, so you'd have to kind of balance that out and see what you like. But like you said with the Magic, I mean, it's weird to think how Brandon Ingram would fit into that team. I would think him and Paolo
And Franz
all playing in the same lineup would be very interesting. If we're being honest, Paolo and Brandon Ingram aren't necessarily the most opposite players. They're kind of similar.
Very similar.
I would say maybe Paolo has a little bit more playmaking to him, and Brandon Ingram a little bit of a better shooter. But other than that, they've got some similarities to their games. So it'd be an interesting fit to the Magic. And then obviously the Cavs. We've been in love with Jared Allen for 2 years now. It feels like Jared Allen to the Pels is always one of those things that gets floated around the trade deadline and during the offseason. And maybe this is the year it finally gets done. Maybe we get Jared Allen and one of their bench guards like a Max Strus or Ty Jerome for Brandon Ingram and Dyson Daniels or Larry Nance, however the salary makes it fit. But, you know, they've had a lot of reports saying Brandon Ingram will not be a Pelican in 2025 or the 2024-2025 season. So we'll sit back and wait and see what develops there. But these are just a few ideas we'll float around based on what's being said in the media. If it were up to me, Brandon Ingram would be a Pelican for life. I love him. I think he's genuinely one of my favorite players in the league. And I know he's very frustrating sometimes because if the mid-range isn't hitting, he's going to go 2 for 14 and he's going to score 8 points on some free throws, and then that's about all he gives you. But I think he's a really good player. I think he's a great leader, and I think the development he's had since his rookie season is outstanding. And then add on to that, he's only 26 and he's made an all-star game. So obviously I don't want him to go anywhere, but it's looking like it's pushing towards that. So we just wanted to float out some ideas as to where Brandon Ingram may land.
Yeah, and another team that was brought to my attention earlier today that isn't on this list, and we talked about earlier, would be the Detroit Pistons, who ended up getting the 5th pick. Like we talked about earlier, I could see them offering us a package that includes that first pick and one of their younger guys that, depending on who the player that they give us is, wouldn't be too opposed to it. Like we talked about Jaden Ivey, not really what we're looking for, but go on to Duren. Hello.
If we could swing a Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren in the 5th pick for BI in 21, I would take that.
You can't complain.
Yeah.
Jalen Duren is a young stud at the center position. He is the definition of a modern NBA center. He can bring you everything you want. Jaden Ivey, more of a 2-guard, kind of similar to a CJ. I think he's a little bit more athletic, a little bit more of a rim runner than CJ, but he doesn't have that facilitating that we would necessarily want from the 1-guard position. But if you get that number 5 overall pick, there's plenty of prospects there you can look at that may be able to bring that to you.
It also wouldn't hurt to bring in Ivy if you're losing Brandon Ingram because you're moving Trey Murphy to the starting lineup and you're losing a lot of scoring off your bench. And so I know Ivy started for the Pistons. They were the worst team in basketball. Maybe he doesn't start for the Pelicans.
Yeah, and then you think about what does Hawk and Ivy look like together off the bench?
Slasher and shooter. Not
Yeah,
bad.
Dynamic duo.
It could be a really interesting offseason for the Pelicans. Like you said earlier, David Griffin made it very clear that changes will be made. Another contributor at the No Network, which of course check out the No Network, Pels Press, set his over-under at 5.5 for how many people change from this Pelicans team. So whether it's over or under 5 people who were on the squad this year who may no longer be on the team has yet to be seen, but it's a pretty good number. I mean, you think about Brandon Ingram, Larry Nance, Dyson Daniels could be in trade talks. Najee Marshall's a free agent. JV's probably going to walk. CJ McCollum could be on the block. I mean, there's so many people who we don't know if they'll be back in Pelicans uniforms next season. All we do know is that changes will be made, and it'll be interesting to see where we go from 49 wins and out in the first round, and how do we improve upon that, whether it be in the draft, free agency, or the trade market.
Yeah. I'm not the biggest basketball fan in general. Like, I love the Pelicans, but sometimes I could find it hard to watch a game. However, I'm going to bounce off something that Redfish said not that long ago that some of you at home might have just glanced over, but I myself did not. If Max Strus is a Pelican, I will not miss a game.
Max Strus, he says.
I will watch every single game.
Max Strus currently in the playoffs.
Max Strus
Pelicans currently not.
also
I talked about this 2 years ago.
kind of was the Magic that beat the Magic. The Cavs looked horrible in the first half of Game 7, hit only 2 threes in the first half of Game 7 against the Magic, and Max Strus came out of halftime on fire.
As he does.
And even though he had already missed 5, but he came out of halftime on fire, and that lit a fire underneath the Cavs, and they pulled out a victory by a large margin.
All right, just talking about the NBA in general before we end this episode. Obviously, playoffs are going on right now. Nuggets versus Timberwolves, close series. Celtics versus Cavs is a fun one.
I mean, they're
Pacers
all close.
versus Knicks. I think every series is tied up 2-2.
There's two of them are 2-1, 2 of them are 2-2.
So, I mean, yeah, all close series, all fun stuff. I haven't watched as much playoff basketball as I would have hoped, but I'm sure I'll, once the conference finals rolls around, I'll pretty much start watching every game. Hopefully, my secondary Celtics can take home a championship after losing out every single year when they're supposed to win one.
The Dallas Cowboys of the NBA, some are calling them.
That's so disrespectful. It's so true, though. Hopefully, the Boston Celtics can figure out how to win finally. But we've got some young and up and coming teams who I think are really fun, like the Timberwolves and the Pacers. So you never know. You never know what can happen in the NBA. Not only with our New Orleans Pelicans, but league wide. So it should be a fun playoff run. Should be a fun offseason. And as always, we will keep you updated on all things Pels, Saints, and LSU. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to like, comment, subscribe to Off the Dome Sports Podcast here on YouTube. Make sure to follow us on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, _Dome Pod, as well as follow at Be in the Know on X, as that is the network we are a part of. Love those guys over there. They put out great stuff. Guys and gals. Let's be all inclusive here. But the Know Network, great content over there. We're glad to be a part of it. As always, I'm Redfish.
I'm Rebo Hustle.
And I'm Mustang.
And we will see you next time.